Who for the BBC covered the American space program right almost from the very, very start, all the way through to Apollo 11 and to Apollo 13 and all the way through, I think, to the Space Shuttle and to Skylab. And sitting over here in the audience, one of his friends, George Abbey, who was the director of the Johnson Space Flight Center for many years, and for Apollo 13, he was there helping to work out the problems to actually bring those astronauts safely back to Earth. So, Reg, you're going to be talking about Apollo 13, correct? Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for coming. We had, of course, you'll know about Apollo 11 in 1969, which landed. We all thought it was very hazardous, but it went well. And then we had Apollo 12, that landed, and it all went so well, by the time we got to Apollo 13, supposed to be the third moon landing, everybody thought it would be all very ordinary. But it turned out to be far from ordinary, and this, I hope, is how it began.
Some more items for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tank. In addition, I have a shaft and trunnion. Okay. For a look at the Comet Bennett if you need it. Okay. Stand by. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem. Main B, bus undervolt. Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, stand by at 13. We're looking at it. And we had a pretty large bank associated with the crossing and warning them. And as I recall, main B was the one that had a spike on it once before. In the interim here, we're starting to...
Well, and so that began the sort of biggest drama in American space history. For us, I'm a newsman, of course, and for us in the news media, it was the perfect news story. We've got 3 astronauts stranded in space, 200,000 miles out from Earth, on the way to the moon, with no way of turning back, and facing almost certain death. One of the first things we wondered was whether they'd got suicide pills with them, because we didn't think they had much hope of returning to Earth alive. But no, they hadn't got suicide pills, and thank goodness they didn't need them, though they almost did. Well, before the mission, the commander, Jim Lovell, had assured us that he wasn't superstitious. His ancestors came from Italy, and he said, in fact, number 13 was their lucky number. But it's never been NASA's lucky number. They've had quite a lot of trouble on the 13th, and in the case of Apollo 13, it was launched at 13:13 hours, 13 minutes past 1, and it blew up 2 days later, which turned out to be April the 13th, 1970, 40 years ago, in about a fortnight from now. And what happened was that one of its 2 oxygen tanks had blown up, depriving them of their water, oxygen and power supply. Now, this may look a very ordinary picture, but Apollo, the Apollo managers had quite a lot of warnings about things going wrong, but they hadn't recognized them. Now, this shows the Saturn rocket, which had been on the launch pad, waiting to launch the Apollo 13 astronauts for 5 months. And you can see it venting there, and that's venting oxygen. And one of the warnings that went unheeded was that during the rehearsals for the countdown and the launch, they had to go through what's known as a chill down procedure, and at the end of rehearsals they had to pump out 39,000 litres of oxygen, and that's what's happening there, in order to sort of go back to square one and begin again. And what happened on this occasion was that 3 weeks before the launch, 3 carloads of security workers drove out just to one side of the launch pad there. They halted early one morning and waited for instructions. And driver number 1 got out and talked to driver number 2, and then he went back to his car and switched on the engine, and pop, it burst into flames. So he went back to his car, and the drivers of the other 2 cars rushed over to help, and they'd left their engines running, and one after another those cars too burst into flames. So you had some very scared security men and 3 burnt out cars. And what had happened, of course, NASA had pumped out these 39,000 litres of oxygen, and normally the sea breezes would disperse the oxygen, and that would be all right, nothing would happen. Today was a very quiet day, there were no sea breezes, the oxygen hung about low on the ground, and that caused the fires. Well, nobody worried too much about it, nobody had been hurt, so they thought, well, it'll be all right on the day. Well, it wasn't only NASA had troubles. I had personal troubles too, because my wife Margaret there, who worked with me for many years in Europe, was coming to help me cover Apollo 13. It was her first space mission. She'd never before been to the US, and we were going to cover Apollo first of all from the Cape, and then from Houston together. But then something happened to me. I had to take a Japan Airlines flight right across Russia to Tokyo, because the Russians at long last had allowed the international airlines to fly across Siberia, and this shortened the route from Europe to Japan by 1,300 miles, so it was quite a prestigious occasion. And so I flew on this flight and reported it and got to Tokyo, and then after doing a couple of stories there, I was to fly back to New York. But then bad things happened to me. The first big aircraft hijacking occurred. 9 Japanese armed with samurai swords suddenly rose up among 90 passengers and hijacked the plane. And so this was a big story, and the BBC said, well, you must stay and cover this big story. So I did. Most of it I covered at the beginning from my bedroom in